Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is dispose. Now, this verb was suggested by the viewer Ressa, and I just want to say thanks so much for offering this great idea. Now, let's take a moment and review some of the different ways or the definitions, the ways we use this verb or the definitions of it. The first way you might see or hear dispose used means to get rid of something by throwing it away or giving it or even selling it to someone else. Right? So many pieces to this first definition, right? But you might think of an action where you no longer want something. So you're going to put it in a garbage can, or you're going to give it to someone else, or even sell it. A second way you might hear dispose used can mean to kill or destroy. Now, I feel like my experience with this particular definition comes from movies and TV shows with characters kind of doing pretty violent things, and you might hear this used when some other character is going to be killed. A third way you might hear dispose used can mean to consume food or drink rather quickly and even possibly very enthusiastically, right? So someone is really enjoying something. They might use this particular verb to describe that. A fourth way you might hear dispose used can mean to overcome a rival or a threat. Now, with this fourth definition, I am certain I have heard this used in connection to sports, and particularly when there's some type of tournament or where one team is going to advance from a particular match or game, right? And so you might hear the kind of the winner disposed of the loser, right? They overcame that particular threat and they are advancing in some type of tournament. A fifth way you might hear dispose used can mean to bring someone into a particular frame of mind. So with that fifth definition, we might see it used more in literature, kind of describing maybe a person or an event causing someone to be in kind of a particular state of mind. A sixth way you might hear disposed used can mean to arrange things or people in a particular position. Okay. Now, those fifth and sixth definitions a little less common. So for now, I think what's important is that you should know that dispose is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, you're going to drop the E on the end before you add ing. And that's because our verb ends in the pattern of vowel consonant E. Okay? The progressive form of this verb is pronounced disposing. Disposing. Okay? The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made by just adding D, since this verb already ends in an E. Our base verb, dispose, ends in a voiced sound. I know the spelling is O-S-E, but you're really making a Z sound when you pronounce this word. And because Z's are voice sounds, this means the ED ending is just going to make a D sound. And I'm not going to add an extra syllable when I say it. Okay? So the past tense and the participle forms of this verb should sound like this. Disposed. Disposed. Okay? Now, our verb dispose is very commonly used as a phrasal verb, and that phrasal verb is to dispose of. So I've got many examples so that we can take a look at this, but just know many of the meanings are similar to what we've already discussed. So the first way you'll hear dispose of used means to eliminate someone or to get rid of something. Okay? An example of this. Oh no, I disposed of that letter last week. Right? So here might mean someone has thrown it away and now it appears they needed it, but they formally got rid of it. A second way to use the phrasal verb dispose of can mean to settle or resolve something. And resolve can be a new verb for some people. So you might think of kind of being finished dealing with something. An example of this: when will they dispose of this argument, right? When are they going to settle it and stop fighting? A third way to use dispose of can mean to sell or give something away. And generally, this is done permanently, right? So this is very different than loaning something to another person, right? You have that expectation it's going to be returned, not with dispose. An example of this might be, he disposed of several pieces of furniture before moving, right? This is something a lot of people do. They might donate certain things, or they might try and sell them if they think it's valuable to others. And that allows them to move fewer things and maybe make a little money so they can buy new things in their new home. A fourth way you can use dispose of means to kill someone. Okay? An example of this: did the bad guys dispose of the informant? Okay? My example there, again, I have in my mind maybe a movie, a story of some kind. This is not something regular people use on a daily basis, right? Or at least I hope not. Now let's move on and talk about our verb of the day, dispose. And today we're going to focus on using this verb to give advice. There are 3 different ways you can give advice in English. One way is to use the modal should. That's S-H-O-U-L-D, should. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But the second way we'll practice in a moment is to use ought to. And then our third way to give advice is to say had better. And we'll talk about what small differences exist between those 3 ways. Let's start with should. This is probably the most common way you'll hear someone give advice. And the nice thing about making sentences with should is that our pattern in the affirmative and also negative and questions will stay the same no matter what our subject is. So in the affirmative, we start with a subject, we use should, and then our base verb. Let's take a look at an example sentence. You should dispose of unused or expired medications at the local police department. Okay. So again, maybe you're visiting a close friend, a family member, and they note, oh, we have this kind of old medicine just lying around, right? Here, someone is giving you advice, right? Telling that person what they should do with it, right? Take it to this place so it could be safely gotten rid of, okay? Now, if you want to make a negative statement of advice, so you're telling someone they shouldn't do something, right? That's my pattern. We start with our subject, we use should, not, and then the base verb. Here's an example. We shouldn't dispose of this greasy pizza box in the paper recycling. Right? So this can differ in various communities, but I know in mine, they don't want contaminated paper, right? So here, because the pizza has been greasy, they think that's going to negatively impact the other paper recycling. Finally, you can make a yes or no question, right? Where you're asking someone to give you advice, right? To do that, start with should, then we're going to have our subject, then the base verb. Here's another example. Should we dispose of that fruit? How old is it? Right? So here, someone's kind of wondering, like, should we throw this away? Maybe it's gone bad. Okay. Now, our advice can be sort of strengthened with a slightly different phrase, and that phrase is ought to. Okay. When we do this, we only use ought to in the affirmative. There are no negatives, no questions with it, right? And our pattern here will be to start with our subject, use ought to, and then the base verb. Okay. So an example of this might be, he ought to dispose of that mask. It's soiled and torn. right? So maybe we're talking about a facial mask that could protect someone from catching a virus like COVID, right? So here someone is saying, like, this is a good idea. This is what you should do, right? And this tends to be a little stronger than a should. But I always like to also point out how you hear many people use ought to can be a little confusing. Sometimes you're going to hear people kind of blend the ought to in a single word, and it's going to sound like this. Oughta. Oughta. He ought to dispose of that mask, right? The meaning is the same, right? It's just my pronunciation that's changed a little bit. Now let's go to our third way to give advice, and that is using had better. Okay. Again, our pattern here stays the same. We start with a subject, we use had better, and then we use the base verb. Now, many people consider this to be sort of the strongest way to give advice. What makes it a little different than should is, many times we're thinking there will be a bad result if you don't take this advice. There will be consequences if you don't follow this advice. So let's take a look at an example. We had better dispose of these treats before the kids get home. Now, of course, this could be throw them away, right? But it could also mean to eat them very quickly before others notice, right? There were sugary treats around, okay? So the consequence, if we don't do it, the kids are going to eat them all. Then they're going to be wired, and maybe it'll be hard to get them to bed, okay? Let's look at a negative example. To do this, we're going to add not between better and the base verb, okay? And you'll notice from my notes on the screen, we don't ask any questions with had better. So an example here. You had better not dispose of rechargeable batteries in the regular garbage because they can start fires. Now, this sentence has the consequence, right? It has that negative, right? And unfortunately, there are many stories and incidents where this has happened. Fires have started because the rechargeable batteries have just been placed amongst other garbage, okay? So that's, again, a very strong negative, right? People could be hurt, property could be damaged, right? All of those things. So we don't want to just say should here. We want to strengthen that to a had better not. Okay. Now let's spend a moment talking about some words that are related to our verb dispose. The first word we're going to talk about is the noun form of this word. The noun has a slightly different spelling and pronunciation. The noun is pronounced disposal. Disposal. Okay? Just like our verb, the noun can also have a couple different meanings. One way to use this noun is to talk about the action or the process of throwing away or getting rid of something. An example of this might be, the country is examining its disposal of nuclear waste. Okay? So how do we get rid of this? Another way to use disposal can refer to the sale of shares of property or other assets. An example of this, the client wants to discuss the disposal of some underperforming stocks, right? So we might hear that with like an investment advisor, some type of broker. So someone is indicating they want to sell certain investments. Now, a third way you might hear disposal used is as a shortened form of garbage disposal. Right? For some people, this might be a new thing, but it is an electronically or electrical, operated device that is sort of fitted in a pipe in one's kitchen sink. And what it does is it grinds up food waste, right? So you don't really put trash down it, but some people put all kinds of leftover food, right? And it, again, will make a noise as it kind of grounds it up so that it can be pushed through the pipe. So, an example of how you might hear this used in a sentence, someone might ask you, is this safe to put down the disposal? Right? So they're talking about that garbage disposal. Now, another related word you might encounter is the adjective disposable. Right? This adjective can have a couple different meanings. We're going to talk about 3 of them. The first way to use disposable is to describe something that is intended to be used one time or until it's no longer useful and then thrown away. Right? That's that connection to that first definition of we're putting something in the trash or the garbage. An example of this. Did they use disposable diapers with the baby? So here, some people use cloth diapers that can be washed and cleaned and reused. Otherwise, another choice some families make are to use diapers that get used one time and then go into the trash. Another way to use the adjective disposable is to describe someone or something that is able to be dispensed with easily or easily dismissed. Okay, an example of this. Many employees worry that they are disposable, so they keep their resumes updated. Right? They have this sort of fear. My company could fire me at any moment, so I'm going to be prepared. A third way you hear disposable used is to describe certain financial assets that one can readily use, right? Whenever they're needed or whenever they're required. So, an example of this, which disposable funds can we access quickly today? Right? So, many people are going to think about cash in a checking account, right? Something they can access immediately. So it's not something that maybe has to be sold and converted into cash before it is able to be used. Thanks again to Ressa for watching and making this suggestion. I thank you all for watching too. Have a great day.